That's right.
So that's kind of, okay, we want to go to Megan Greene, who's on our panel from the Economist Intelligence Unit. Now, Megan, we're hearing lots of speculation, lots of stuff in the newspapers about a bailout being inevitable. What is your view?
Yeah, I think that a bailout is pretty much inevitable. The government is fully funded through the middle of next year, but borrowing costs have really soared and they're prohibitively high. So the government has until the middle of next year to try to instill some confidence in the markets, and I don't see the government succeeding in doing this. There are big questions about whether the 2011 budget will even be passed in December.
All right, we'll talk about that in a moment, but the pressure that's coming on, will you explain to us, like, who are the people putting pressure on our government to go for a bailout earlier, and what would be the advantage of going for a bailout, say, before the budget?
Right, it's the European Union mainly that's putting pressure on the Irish government to go for a bailout before it runs out of funding, and that's largely to stem contagion to other peripheral EU countries, namely Portugal and Spain.
So it's not for our own good?
It's for the greater good of the European Union, and I just personally don't see the Irish government putting the greater good of the EU ahead of its own national interests.
We've been very good in terms of our first budget, or in fact it was a series of 3 budgets, attempting to bring austerity in and to bring fiscal rectitude. Yeah. We got no thanks from the bond markets. You know, we feel we are the patsy of Europe. We're going to penalise our own people in order to please Europe, which is really not worried about us, it's worried about the euro.
Yeah, I think Ireland has been held up as a model nation early on in this fiscal and sovereign debt crisis because it was the first country to implement strict austerity measures. But because private and public debt are so intertwined now in Ireland, investors are really concerned that actually we haven't found the floor of the banking system. And so with continued bad news coming out of the banks, nobody really knows how many further losses there will be.
What would you say to people here who are terrified, clearly terrified as to what might lie ahead, where the cuts might go, where they might affect their children's education, or the fact that people might have to emigrate because life here will be so difficult?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, getting a bailout from the EU and the IMF is not the end of the world. Actually, I think that Ireland is not insolvent. It just has a liquidity problem. So if the IMF and the EU offer an emergency lending facility to Ireland, it would give Ireland 2 years of sort of breathing space to draw a line under its banking system and try to rein in its budget deficit before it can return to the markets in 2013.
So you don't see it as a negative ticked against Ireland's name?
Well, there's certainly a stigma about it, and additionally, with so many austerity measures, domestic demand in Ireland is really going to be choked off over the next couple of years, so Ireland will really rely on its export sector to grow. But it's very likely...
Any way we can separate the banks out from the rest of the economy and say, okay, this is our problem. You know, the rest of the economy will improve in time, but the banks are, if you like, now systemic problem. Can we separate that out and get it fixed, look for money for the banking sector and let the rest of the economy take care of itself?
I think at this point, given how much the government has propped up the banking sector, the public and private debt are really entwined. So I think that's very difficult at this point.
Konstantin Gurdjieff, a bailout, do you see it as inevitable? Something to be wished for, something to be avoided?
Well, I certainly don't see it as something to be wished for, and I wholly disagree with what Megan said there. In fact, I think she contradicted herself by first stating that we do not face liquidity crisis, then denying that we face a solvency crisis, and then going for the liquidity crisis as the crisis we face. Let's look at what we call bailout. In fact, bailout that is being offered to us is yet another credit card to a household which can't afford the bills that it's running. You can't fight debt with debt. If anything, if you look at, for example, the numbers that are coming out and being rumored, 60 billion, what does 60 billion additional loan to this government mean in the current environment? That means anyone who is working in this country will be saddled with additional debt of 33,000 euro. Everyone who is working. Do we really need it in the environment in which we have the collapse in equity in our homes, in which we have the destruction of the wholesale destruction of our asset base, in which the investment has shrunk by 70+%? Do we really need more debt? No, we need structural reforms. This country, if you look at the country itself, if you look at our economy, there's a part of this economy which is firing on all cylinders, and it's exporting sectors. We grow our exports. There are fantastic firms out there. Some of them are still hiring. Some of them are trying to hire, trying to raise capital, trying to survive, and trying to actually open new markets. That economy is working. Unfortunately, that economy is not large for us to carry the entire economy with it. What we need is we need the investment. What we need is we need entrepreneurship. How can you have an entrepreneurship and investment if you load in more and more debt onto the households, onto the very entrepreneurs? And for what? To protect the so-called front services? Not even that. What is this debt that we're being offered right now by the EU for?
Okay. Constantine, what is the alternative to where we are now?
Well, the alternative is to recognize that the problem we're facing is the debt problem. And if the problem we're facing is the debt problem, like a corporation, you restructure. You restructure public debt. If you need to, you restructure private debt. The households, mortgage holders, you reduce their debt burden. Maybe through the means such as partial write-offs, maybe through the means such as, for example, orderly bankruptcy for the households, which is not punitive, which is not prohibitive, not the type of bankruptcy that we have right now. You know, that's what you do. And once you've done that, you go on with the business of rebuilding your economy. And we can rebuild our economy. What is really frustrating for me as an economist in this country is to watch how the productive economy is being shafted down back by the need to repay bondholders in the banks, by the need to repay, to pay, for example, Croke Park Agreement and things like that. We need to put more resources into productive economy. That will carry us out. And it is not done by taking more money from Angela Merkel.
Megan, and it's a good analogy. You've got loads of debts, so what do? Get another credit card from another lending institution and spend all of that, which only at the end of the day makes a bigger mountain of debt for you to deal with.
Right. So with a bailout, you'd be borrowing at a lower rate than what you would need to borrow in the markets. And so I think if you look at my forecast for Irish growth, which is much more pessimistic than the government's, by 2013, Ireland will have a primary surplus and can stabilize and begin to bring down its debt levels.
Doing your arithmetic, you reckon that with the bailout money, at a rate of what, do you think?
Around 5%, which is 5%. What Greece has received for its bailout.
And a growth rate of what?
So I expect growth to actually fall next year by around 1% and then to grow by around 1.5% for the following 2 years.
Okay, the government is predicting 1 3/4 growth rate for next year. But even taking your pessimistic calculation, you're saying we will have a surplus by 2013?
Well, Ireland will still have a primary surplus, which isn't including debt servicing costs, of around 4% by 2013. Which should be enough to stabilize its debt
this
level.
is the formula, if you like, which you think will work to get Ireland out of trouble?
Yes.
All right. Constantine, it seems very simple, elegant.
No, I don't think so. I don't think these numbers add up. I've done the numbers, for example, and you're looking at, first of all, it all assumes that the 5% debt can be guaranteed at 5% debt. European Financial Stabilization Fund is a 3-year facility. In 3 years' time, you have to refinance that debt. If the European Central Bank raises their interest rates within the 3 years' time, forget your assumption about 5%. You're looking at something higher. If there is a further deterioration in the economy, your debt is far
ECB
higher.
rate is 1% at the moment.
No, but ECB rate is
hang
for
on,
the
just
interbank.
let me say this.
Different.
So the 5%, if we were to get it, is still a penal rate.
Of course.
So if we're no longer being penalised in 3 years' time, then we will be negotiating the market rate, if you like, which might be 5%, or it might even be less.
The point is that we have to take care of the structural deficit that we face. It's not going to disappear in 3 years. The nature of the structural deficit is that it doesn't go away when your economy returns to the growth path. The structural deficit in Ireland is so large, it's closer to double digits. If you're looking at it from that point of view, it doesn't matter if we plug the hole for 3 years. 3 years down the road, we're still going to have to borrow because the deficit is still going to be there. So, again, you cannot fight the problem with debt with mounting more debt.
No, but Constantine, the simple thing is, if you've got a household that has a surplus, eventually, maybe it takes 40 years, they pay off their debt if they have a surplus every year.
But we have surplus on the traded side of the economy. That is a surplus on what our multinational corporations and some indigenous exporters, but predominantly multinational corporations, generate relative to imports of the inputs that they take in. Our surplus right now is underpinned by the fact that our imports, aka consumption, has collapsed completely. Sooner or later, we're going to start to have to replace the broken household appliances which haven't been rebought and repurchased over the last 3 years. When we do, our imports go up, surplus vanishes. It's not the point. The point is that you cannot carry 60% of your economy, 70% of your economy, the domestic sector of this economy, which is operating on the back of a massive deficit run by the government.
All right, Sean, what's your feeling, Chambers Ireland? I mean, are you as pessimistic as Constantine?
I mean, I think the reality is we don't know. I mean, and the people who really know are the people who aren't coming out on front of stage here and talking. But the reality is what we can do. We did invite the government to give us a representative, but I can understand their reluctance to say something that might prove to be absolutely the opposite tomorrow. Yeah, but I mean, the fundamental point is let's control the things we can control and not the things that we can't. And the things that we can control are our budgetary deficit. We're spending the guts of €50 billion a year. We're taking in taxes €31 billion a year. a year. That is not sending confidence to people who want to lend us money that we are plugging that hole. So we need to get our taxes fairly distributed, fairly gathered, up, and our spending down, so that we get to a point where we're in balance, where we're actually paying what we're spending. And the gap of €20 billion is not credible and doesn't help us this time.
But how do we do that? Hang on a second, Sean. Yeah. One of the things they hope will happen is that spending will increase, and therefore you get receipts.
Absolutely, yeah. Spending
taxes will increase.
I'm saying getting taxes up, and clearly transaction taxes are one of the crucial ways that consumers, right now, every household in this state is saving about 12.2% of its revenue each year. They're paying down mortgage debt, they're paying down credit card debt, but they're saving at a huge amount. Do they need to save 12.2%? Unemployment is still very, very high at 13-odd%, but it's stabilised. So, in fact, our figures regarding mortgage arrears and the like, we may well have stabilised at this stage. What people need is the confidence to go out there and do a kitchen extension, buy a car, do the things that a normal, modern economy does. But equally, we need to gather new taxes to actually pay for that, to actually close the gap. So what we need is, different types of taxes. We need water charges introduced. We need more user charges, because a property tax is a more fair way of raising taxes than actually squeezing income in the economy.
So we're going to have to cut what, though?
Well, we were involved in the local government efficiency review group, for example. One local authority has 49 directors of services. Do we need 40? That's the second highest.
Which one
leadership.
Is that? Just tell us.
Dublin City Council has 49 directors of services. Now, if it was me, do we need more street cleaners, or do we need 6 directors of services in Dublin City Council? I think it's obvious what we need. Fingal County Council has dropped from 5 to 4, and they're still doing a good job with a population of 200,000. That's an example.
So Dublin City Council has 49 and Fingal has 5?
Yes,
down to 4.
Now, admittedly, it's slightly bigger populations, but that's a big number of differential. And when you throw in the pension costs of that alone, that is not frontline services being maintained. Do we need more?
Okay, so there are ways and means of creatively trying to bridge that gap to try and get to even Steven, so we balance our books.
Yeah, we can't.
I want to move on to a different element here, though, and I'll show and come back to you this month. The by-election, we're going to be talking about it later on in the programme, Megan. Are the bondholders looking at our by-election? Do they care about what happens in Donegal?
Yeah, I think they're concerned only in that it could reduce the wafer-thin majority that the government has even further. But
if the government party, in the form of one of the candidates we'll be meeting later on, was to win, giving them an extra bit of comfort, what would the bondholders do to that?
I don't think it would have any effect on the bond markets. I think
and if the opposition were to win, any of the opposition were to win that seat,
it would cause some concern.
About
political stability generally and how long the government has in office.
Constantine?
I don't buy this whatsoever. Again, I think that what the markets are looking into, just as the rest of the nation, they are looking at non-political issue. It's not about the party, one party leading or the other party leading. It's about the fact that the government, in the current crisis situation, any government, even current government, needs a renewal of mandate. This is what it is about. And they're looking at the circus we created in terms of the having in one location by-election, denying by-elections in all other locations, and they're saying that is unstable. Sooner or later it's going to break down and there will be general elections.
So you think a general election with a whopping majority for a Fine Gael Labour coalition, even though they are diametrically opposed on many economic issues?
That is a secondary issue. But what the market participant will look at, they're going to look at, can the government implement what needs to be implemented? Significant cuts, significant reforms. Not so much tax increases, because I don't believe that there is a capacity in this economy to pay any higher taxes, really, but reforms of taxation system and the reforms of the economy at large. The only way that can be achieved is by giving the government, whether the current government or a new government, a clear mandate from the electorate. The by-elections are not going to deliver that. So I think that the uncertainty that we're seeing in the markets, the kind of psychosis in the markets, are going to persist no matter what the outcome.
Yeah, I said let's do the things we can control, as we said before. Let's work towards balancing the books. All of our chambers around the country would be very much in agreement of let's get to that 3% deficit within the 4 years. Yes, there's going to be pain. Do high net worth individuals need children's allowance, for example? I don't think they do. Would I rather, as a taxpayer, on a personal level, prefer to focus on the 100,000 children who are at the margins of our society? Yes, I would. That's a cut that has to happen, and let's get on with it. And similarly with all the other measures, we've been talking about a water charge at the governmental level the last 18 months. Let's get on with it, because we need resources to invest in new water needs in the future. And what we need now is more focus on execution, more focus on savings arising from the Croke Park Agreement, so that we can actually all justify how it worked so that we can actually get on with producing a viable society. And remember, this is the 5th best place in the world to live right now,
right,
even amidst all the pain we're in.
Do you favour a general election and clear the air?
That's a political decision. I don't. That's we
need to have a view.
No, we need a balanced budget. We need a clear plan, and we need our governmental parties and the opposition to sign up to it.
At the moment, we are on the cusp all the time of a government falling. So that is not stability.
But if we pass the budget, and the senses are that we are going to pass the budget between both of the major political parties have signed up to the envelope, or more or less the thrust of the envelope that's needed. We did it in '87. An opposition party came in and implemented the previous party's budget. I think the sense is that's going to happen again. We've done it before. We can take a lot of pain. There's a lot of slack there. We're amongst the best paid people in the world. We can do it.
I think for 3 years now we've been in a crisis, and for 3 years we've been hearing the same thing. Let's pass the balanced budget. Let's do something about it. If you look at the raw numbers, the current expenditure of this government has been going up and up and up and up. The taxes, and remember, we've been told, read my lips, yes? No more taxes, yes? Well, the taxes have been going up and up and up and up. At the same time, the tax revenue is not really improving. What they're calling stabilization is that we are kind of now running parallel but below last year's disaster. So it's the disaster which is not getting more disastrous is stabilization in our language.
Okay.
That's the turnaround. So the reality is, the current budget, the proposal of 15 billion, is not going to deliver stability. It still assumes that in 2014 and 2015 we will be living beyond our means as a state by 3%, even if it is deliverable.
Quick question for Megan. If people have deposits in the banks, does the bailout affect them?
No.
No, their deposits are safe. Okay. Look, my thanks to our panel here, Constantine and Sean and Megan. Some more of the comments coming in. The way Ireland is at the moment, we can either let the St. Vincent de Paul run the country or else become a province of Germany. From Shane Coonan, the main thing which is being cut and lost in reality is Irish pride. I no longer feel proud to be Irish. If Pádraig Pearse and the other signatories of the proclamation were still alive today, I strongly believe they would be ashamed of the Irish people and Ireland as a country.